to the Daily Bite. I'm your host, Pastor Steve Andrews. Today we study from 2 Chronicles chapter 21 about the reign of Jehoram, son of Jehoshaphat. Jehoshaphat slept with his fathers and was buried with his fathers in the city of David, and Jehoram his son reigned in his place. He had brothers, the sons of Jehoshaphat, Azariah, Jehiel, Zechariah, Azariah, Michael, and Shephatiah. All these were the sons of Jehoshaphat, king of Israel. Their father gave them great gifts of silver, gold, and valuable possessions, together with fortified cities in Judah. But he gave the kingdom to Jehoram, because he was the firstborn. When Jehoram had ascended to the throne of his father and was established, he killed all his brothers with the sword, and also some of the princes of Israel. Jehoram was 32 years old when he became king, and he reigned 8 years in Jerusalem. And he walked in the way of the kings of Israel, as the house of Ahab had done. For the daughter of Ahab was his wife, and he did what was evil in the sight of Yahweh. Yet Yahweh was not willing to destroy the house of David because of the covenant that he had made with David, and since he had promised to give him a lamp to him and to his sons forever. In his days Edom revolted from the rule of Judah and set up a king of their own. Then Jehoram passed over with his commanders and all his chariots, and he rose by night and struck the Edomites, who had surrounded him, and his chariot commanders. So Edom revolted from the rule of Judah to this day. At that time Libnah also revolted from his rule, because he had forsaken Yahweh the God of his fathers. Moreover, he made high places in the hill country of Judah, and led the inhabitants of Jerusalem into whoredom, and made Judah go astray. And a letter came to him from Elijah the prophet, saying, Thus says Yahweh the God of David your father, because you have not walked in the ways of Jehoshaphat your father, or in the ways of Asa king of Judah, but have walked in the way of the kings of Israel, and have enticed Judah and the inhabitants of Jerusalem into whoredom, as the house of Ahab led Israel into whoredom. And also you have killed your brothers of your father's house, who were better than you. Behold, Yahweh will bring a great plague on your people, your children, your wives, and all your possessions, and you yourself will have a severe sickness with the disease of your bowels, until your bowels come out, because of the disease, day by day. And Yahweh stirred up against Jehoram the anger of the Philistines and of the Arabians, who are near the Ethiopians, and they came up against Judah and invaded it, and carried away all the possessions they found that belonged to the king's house, and also his sons and his wives, so that no son was left to him except Jehoahaz, his youngest son. And after all this Yahweh struck him in the bowels with an incurable disease. In the course of time, at the end of 2 years, his bowels came out because of the disease, and he died in great agony. His people made no fire in his honor, like the fires made for his fathers. He was 32 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 8 years in Jerusalem. And he departed with no one's regret. They buried him in the city of David, but not in the tombs of the kings. This is the word of the Lord. So we have our 5th king of Judah. We've had Rehoboam, who was evil. Abijah is not described as evil in the eyes of Yahweh in Chronicles, but he would fall under that category as well. And then we've had 2 good ones between Asa and Jehoshaphat, and now Jehoram is back on the wicked side here. So we've got 2 good kings, 3 bad up to this point with Jehoram. So Jehoshaphat dies and leaves Jehoram, his son, as king in his place. He had other sons, 6 of them, so 1 of 7, and he gave his sons many gifts. He lavished his gifts, his great riches that he had, upon his sons, including giving them various cities in the land of Judah. But because Jehoram was firstborn, he made Jehoram king in his place. Verse 4, when Jehoram had ascended to the throne, and his reign was established over the kingdom, so there were no questions about it, he killed his brothers, and also some of the princes of Israel, so some of the other leading families. Might be a spot to ask your children, why would he do such a terrible thing? Why would he kill his brothers? This is a worldly fear. This is not uncommon in the worldly kingdoms of history, that a king, when he first ascends to the throne, would kill anyone else that might possibly have a claim to that throne, so that they can't take it from him. And that's the move Jehoram makes. He kills all his brothers. There's no other heir to the throne, just him. It's a really sad move to make. Wicked, not just sad. Evil in the sight of Yahweh. He reigned 8 years. There seems to be on the timeline here a little overlap with his reign and the reign of his father, which does sometimes happen, that sons' reigns start during their father's reigns. So 841 BC is about the time of Jehoram's death, just to help you put this on the calendar. Now, he walked in the ways of the kings of Israel as the house of Ahab had done. So instead of in the house of Judah, which he was a part of, he walks in the ways of Israel. Why? For the daughter of Ahab was his wife. Remember that marriage alliance that Jehoshaphat, his father, had made with the king of Israel, Ahab? Here it is. The houses are connected. Jehoshaphat's son is married to the daughter of that wicked Israelite king who has led his people away from God. What does he expect of this daughter? This is Deuteronomy chapter 7, where the Lord instructs his people not to marry a foreigner, not to marry outside of the house of Israel, because doing so, you would be marrying a person who would be a worshiper of false gods, and they would teach you to worship the false gods, and you would no longer be true to Yahweh. And Israel has fallen. Israel has fallen that way. They have gone the way of pagan gods, pagan worship. And so that Deuteronomy 7 command, it would apply that the Judaites should not marry outside of Judah, because doing so would invite paganism. And that's exactly what we see with this text, that Jehoram is married to the daughter of Ahab and ends up thus doing exactly like Ahab did. Evil in the sight of Yahweh. But, verse 7, Yahweh was not willing to destroy the house of David because of the covenant he had made with David, since he had promised to give a lamp to him and to his sons forever. Promise. 2 Samuel chapter 7. God made a promise to David that one of his descendants would sit on his throne forever. So God is keeping that promise. God is not allowing the house of David to be wiped off the face of the earth. Even though it's wicked, even though it has fallen, even though this descendant of David, this particular king, is teaching the people to worship false gods, the Lord is still faithful. The Lord is still true to his word. This is the thing that we really hang our hope on, because we are not always faithful. Like we saw with Jehoshaphat and Asa, that they had a tendency to go astray, even when they were called good kings. So it is with the faithful of God's people today, that we still have a tendency to sin against God. We still have pet sins that we want to try to keep, and this is not good. But thanks be to God for his faithfulness, because if it was not for his faithfulness, we would be lost. But he is faithful. He has made a promise, and he always keeps his promise. This is good news. Thanks be to God. So in the reign of Jehoram, we have revolts from two different groups. You have the Edomites, who are the relatives, the descendants of Esau, brother of Jacob, who lives south of the Salt Sea. And then we also have Libnah. Libnah is a city of the Judaites that's located in southwestern Judah, not far from Mareshah, and south of Gath a little bit, it looks like on a map here. So southwestern part of Judah. Both of these groups rebel against Jehoram because they cannot stand his rule. Edom, we're not told specifically that it connects to Yahweh, but we are with Libnah, that they rebelled against him because he had forsaken Yahweh. That's intriguing, that they would do such a thing, that they would recognize that the king had abandoned God, and so he's no longer fit to be their king. That's fair, actually, in the Old Testament kingdom. That because he has abandoned Yahweh, he truly does not have that spot of authority anymore. So the people of Libnah see that quite well. It's a theocracy, really. It's a monarch, but God is in control. So he made the high places in the hill country. So he sets up these pagan worship sites throughout the hill country, the hills of Judah. And he leads the inhabitants into whoredom, making Judah go astray. This is twofold. This is the idea of adultery against God. So God likes to use that marriage metaphor for his relationship with his people. So he is the husband and Israel is his bride, or New Testament, Christ is the groom. We, the church, are the bride. So to worship false gods is to commit adultery against God. It is to choose another husband, although they aren't really another husband to begin with. They don't exist. It's also, though I said twofold, because part of the various pagan worship practices that were going on in the ancient Near East was temple prostitution. That in order to gain the attention or gain the favor of the gods, you would have prostitutes who would work in these high places. And if you or I wanted to gain that god's favor, we would go and we would visit the prostitute and we would pay a sacrificial offering of some kind, and we would have sex with the prostitute. So there is a literal whoredom in addition to the metaphorical whoredom, both of these things likely involved in that phrase here in verse 11. At this point, verse 12, a letter comes from the prophet Elijah. This is intriguing in itself because we haven't really heard about Elijah. We've had all kinds of other prophets, Micaiah, Hanani, Jehu, but now we get one of the chief prophets, one of the major Old Testament prophets. In fact, he is the one that represents the prophets when they talk about their scriptures. So when you get to the New Testament era, they don't call it the Old Testament yet because they don't have the New Testament, so they call it the Law and the Prophets. And the law was represented by Moses, and the prophets were represented by Elijah. This is why, with the transfiguration of Jesus on the Mount of Transfiguration, you have Moses and Elijah who come to speak with Jesus. So this is big news for the king of Judah to receive a letter from Elijah himself. And it's not a good letter. So Elijah is going to spend more time probably with the people of Israel, the northern kingdom, certainly with their kings, but he does send this letter. It would appear to be very quickly before he's taken up to heaven. So in 2 Kings 2, he's whisked away the chariot of fire that leads him into heaven. So Elijah never dies. That's really early in Jehoram's reign, it would appear, from its placement in 2 Kings. So this is not a long letter in coming. So what does he say? Thus says Yahweh, the God of David your father, so you should be following his ways, because you have not walked in the ways of Jehoshaphat your father, or Asa, but have walked in the ways of the king of Israel, have enticed Judah and its inhabitants into whoredom, as the house of Ahab led Israel into whoredom. So you see the connection that we've already talked about. Also you have killed your brothers, who were better than you. There's a bit of a slam that he sneaks in there. Behold, Yahweh will bring a plague upon your people and your children, your wives, and all your possessions. And you yourself will have a severe sickness, disease of the bowels. Your bowels will come out. Intense. I mean, this is, Jehoram is going to be judged by the Lord. He's going to have everything taken away from him, which is then what we see. So what Elijah prophesies, the next two paragraphs show us comes to pass. So God, Yahweh, stirs up against Jehoram two enemies, the Philistines to the southwest and the Arabians to the southeast. So Arabia, here being described as near Ethiopia, it's across the Red Sea from Ethiopia. So these two enemies come against Jehoram, and they capture and they take away much of what was in his house. So the king's palace is raided, and they take his sons and his wives. Now, why would an enemy invading army do that? There is the sense of what Yahweh has said. This is Yahweh's judgment against him. There's also the practical matter of the grief that this would cause to a king, and his basically indebtedness that he would feel towards these other nations because they have his wives, they have his sons, so he would not act against them. So it might be a defensible thing, but specifically here we know because Yahweh has said so. However, a son was left to him, Jehoahaz, his youngest. It might be a question to ask your children, why is one of his sons left? Why did the enemy armies not take all of them? And this isn't, oh, well, he was just a baby, so they didn't care. This isn't, oh, well, he was hidden from them, so they didn't find him. This is God keeping his promise. Again, 2 Samuel 7, one of David's sons sit on the throne of Jerusalem forever. God is not wiping out the line of David. Jehoahaz will carry it on. God is faithful, even when Jehoram hasn't been. So after that has occurred, the Lord strikes him with the bowel disease, and after 2 years of this disease, he dies in great pain as his bowels come out. So his innards, his body got turned inside out in a gross and painful way. The people burned no fire in his honor, like they had for his fathers before him. We saw that specifically said of Asa. We get the repeat in verse 20 that he was 32 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 8 years. He departed with no one's regret. That's a really rough thing to say of a king, that there's not a single person in the kingdom that cared. Not cared. There's not a single person in the kingdom that was upset by his death. They were glad that he was gone. This is how bad his reign was. And it's not just because he's rejected Yahweh. I mean, you couldn't say the same thing of Ahab. And he was a wicked king that rejected Yahweh. So so bad is Jehoram in his reign over these people. They bury him in the city of David, so they bury him in Jerusalem, but they don't bury him in a kingly tomb. He is not given the honor of being buried with his fathers.